My name is Rosemary Ellison. I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I was a surgical nurse at a modest regional hospital in Vermont. I raised a daughter, buried a husband, paid off our old house in monthly drops of sacrifice, and never once asked for more than I was given. I was the quiet kind of mother, the one who folds laundry in the background while others take the credit. The kind of woman you think won't mind being forgotten because she doesn't make noise about it. But that kind of thinking can be a mistake, a costly one. Caroline, my daughter, once told her friend over dinner that I was the safest bet in the world, like an old teapot, sturdy, predictable. She didn't know I overheard that, or maybe she did and just didn't care. That's how it often felt with her. Caroline was raised in the same house where I learned how to stretch soup for a week, yet she moved through life like she was born into marble countertops and private yoga instructors. Her husband, Trevor, a tech consultant who used words like synergy and optimize even in family conversations, always looked at me like I was a relic from a time best forgotten. So when they invited me to house sit their new $950,000 mansion in the foothills outside San Francisco, while they took the whole family to St. Bart's for a 2-week holiday, I should have asked more questions, but I didn't. Caroline's message had been brief. "Mom, it's just for a couple of weeks. Jenna would love it if you stayed in her room. Trevor and I really appreciate it. We trust you." That last part stuck with me. We trust you. 3 words I had waited most of my life to hear from her. When they picked me up at the airport, Caroline didn't hug me. She air-kissed my cheek like we were acquaintances, then passed me her sunglasses so I could hold them for a second. Trevor didn't say much at all, just scrolled through his phone in the passenger seat while Caroline gave me a well-rehearsed tour of their home. Skylights, underfloor heating, automated blinds, glass everywhere. It was the kind of house that didn't feel lived in, just performed. "Treat it like your own," she said, handing me a single house key. "Except, obviously, don't go into the security room." "That's where all Trevor's work servers are." She said it quickly, like an afterthought. I nodded. The security room was behind a sleek white door near the laundry hallway. The door had no label, just a digital keypad and a blinking green light above it. It looked like it belonged in a tech startup, not a home. I didn't plan to touch it. I respected boundaries, even when they weren't offered with respect. The morning they left, Caroline set a bottle of Merlot on the kitchen counter with a handwritten note. "You'll love the peace here." She signed it in her tight slanted script. Caroline always prided herself on neat penmanship. Trevor added nothing. He simply nodded at me as he wheeled out Jenna's pink suitcase. Then, as he opened the door, he turned and said, "Get warm, Rosemary," like I had been standing out in the cold all my life. And this house, this sleek, impersonal house, was supposed to be some kind of warmth. Caroline smiled behind him, already halfway to the car. Jenna, their daughter, waved from the back seat, her iPad glowing in her lap. They drove away without looking back. The silence that followed was the most honest moment the house had given me yet. I stood there for a while, holding the wine bottle like a gift I didn't want. The note sat beside it, cheerful and pointed, as if even gratitude was something curated. I tucked it into my purse and walked through the house alone. The ceilings were too high, every sound echoed. At first I tried to enjoy it. I made tea, sat in the bay window, opened one of the hardback novels on the pristine shelf. But something felt off, too still, too polished, like the house had been set up for showings, not for living. Later that afternoon, while dusting the baseboards, because old habits die hard, I noticed a small black dome nestled above the bookshelf. It was the kind you might see in a grocery store or a hotel hallway, a security camera. I paused. Maybe they'd mentioned it? I couldn't remember. But it made sense, I told myself. It was a large property. Maybe they just wanted to keep an eye on break-ins or package thieves. Still, something about the angle of the camera bothered me. It was aimed directly at the couch, where I had just been reading. The tiny red light on it blinked every few seconds. I walked from room to room, suddenly aware of every motion sensor, every sleek black dot in the ceiling, every soft click when I passed certain spots. The living room, the hallway, the guest bathroom, all of it. Watched. But the camera in the hallway wasn't blinking. It was off. The one in the kitchen blinked steadily. The one above the stairs had a slow, almost sleeping pulse. And then there was the sound. Every time I passed the door to the security room, there was a faint clicking noise. Not mechanical, not electric. It sounded like the soft tap of fingers on glass, like someone behind the door had heard me and responded. That night, I opened the Merlot, not because I wanted it, but because the quiet was too dense. I sipped slowly, sitting on the edge of Jenna's twin-sized bed, staring at the LED nightlight that glowed soft pink from the corner. It was shaped like a bunny. I thought about how this was supposed to be a vacation. For them, and in some twisted way, for me. A chance to feel included, trusted, useful. I set the glass down and walked to the living room. The shadows shifted slightly as I passed beneath the chandelier. When I looked up again at the bookshelf camera, I spoke out loud without thinking. "Who are you watching for?" The red light blinked back. Once, then again. If you're still here, listening, just know I'm glad you're here. This story isn't fiction. It's not exaggerated. It's just what happened, exactly the way it happened. And if it touches something in you, if you've ever felt observed but unseen, useful but disposable, stay with me. And maybe, let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know I'm not alone. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Old habits. The house was still, not just quiet, but still in the way that made you feel like even the air had been told to behave. I sat up in the bed, sheets perfectly tucked, barely wrinkled from my sleep. The mattress was firm, the kind hotels brag about. But it wasn't comfortable. It didn't feel like anything really. Just another polished surface. The light in the corner of the room blinked on automatically. I hadn't touched anything. It was one of those motion sensor nightlights, the kind Jenna once called magic lights when she was younger. But this one didn't have a switch. I looked for one. I even crouched beside it, checked the base, the socket, the molding on the wall. No switch, no cord. Just a faint red glow that faded after a few seconds, only to blink back to life whenever I moved. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the kitchen. The blinds adjusted themselves as I passed. First the left panel, then the right. They rotated in unison, letting in a soft stream of morning light that barely touched the hardwood floor. The floor didn't creak. The walls didn't sigh. This house wasn't made to respond to human life. It was made to showcase it. I opened the fridge and saw that everything was organized in perfect symmetry. Pre-cut fruit in glass containers, milk with the label facing forward, eggs in a ceramic tray shaped like half a dozen pebbles. Even the butter dish had its own compartment, and the toast settings were pre-programmed on the smart screen built into the counter. I reached for the kettle and paused. A sleek black orb was tucked between the toaster and the knife block. Too small to be a speaker, too round to be decorative. It blinked. I didn't say anything. I just boiled water and made tea. When I sat down at the counter, the lights above me adjusted, dimmed slightly, like they sensed I preferred soft light in the mornings, or perhaps they were trained to respond to the way I moved. I stared into my tea as it steeped and let the steam rise slowly into the filtered air. There were no family photos on the walls, no magnets on the fridge, no paper, no pencils, no fingerprints. Even Jenna's artwork, which I remembered Caroline used to hang when she was younger, was nowhere in sight. Just minimalist prints in thin black frames. One was a splash of gray on white canvas. Another looked like a brushstroke that had been interrupted halfway through. They felt cold, decorative, not expressive. I wandered through the hallway and noticed a small bookshelf, too small to hold stories, really, more like a collection of color-coded spines arranged by tone. Beige, ash, bone, white. not a single crease among them. I pulled one out. Its pages were crisp, untouched. I slid it back in place and looked toward the hallway leading to the laundry room. That's when I heard it again. Click. It was faint, like a tap, a rhythmic, tiny sound just as I passed the white door Caroline had called the security room. The green light above the keypad blinked softly. Nothing alarming, nothing urgent, but I could have sworn the sound only happened when I walked by. I leaned in closer and held my breath. Silence. Then the moment I stepped away, click. I stared at the door. Not because I wanted to open it, I didn't, but because it felt like it knew I was there, like something beyond it had noticed. Later that afternoon, I decided to water the plants in the glass atrium off the dining room. Caroline had mentioned that the hydrangeas needed a little attention and joked that she'd rather leave them with me than risk Trevor forgetting. I didn't mind. I loved tending to something that didn't talk back. The atrium was spotless, every leaf pristine, the soil soft but dry. As I bent over to water the base of one of the larger pots, I noticed a strange shadow near the baseboard. I reached over and brushed back a decorative lantern that had been placed beside the planter. Behind it, partially concealed, was a small white device with a blinking light. It was angled upward, toward the chair where I had been reading the evening before. I froze. Not because I was scared. I was unnerved. That's the word. Like being observed at a dinner party where you thought you were alone. I picked up the watering can again and finished my task. Then I moved the lantern back into place. Deliberately, slowly. Later that evening, I set the table for one. I didn't need to, but it felt like a ritual. One plate, one napkin, a glass of water. I sat and ate my dinner, leftover lentil soup I had brought from home. As I chewed, I glanced toward the hallway. The light above the security room still blinked. Jenna had once asked me why her room at home always looked different when I came to visit. I didn't understand what she meant at first. Then she said, "It's like Mommy erases you before you get there, then builds you back after you leave." I remember being quiet for a long time after that. I didn't know how to explain to an 8-year-old what it felt like to be edited out of someone's life. That night, I crawled back into bed. The mattress hadn't softened. The sheets still smelled faintly of starch and lavender. As I lay down, the nightlight blinked on again. Soft red, then off, then on. I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap itself around me like gauze. Not warm, not cold, just enough to remember that this house had space for everyone, except the people who leave marks. I woke up around 2:30 a.m., not from a sound, but from a feeling, a tension in the air like someone had just left the room, or maybe was still in it. I sat up slowly, listening. Nothing. No creaks, no wind, not even the hum of a fridge, just a stillness so complete it pressed against my skin. As I reached for my glass of water on the nightstand, something caught my eye. A flicker, barely there. I looked up. Near the corner of the ceiling, just above the closet, a red dot blinked once, paused, blinked again. I stared at it. Blinking back, my breath held so tightly in my chest it hurt. It was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I lay back, eyes still on that light. It didn't pulse like a smoke detector. It was rhythmic, deliberate, alive. I didn't sleep after that. I turned on the lamp beside the bed and sat up against the headboard, knees pulled close. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a light sensor or a humidity detector. But I had been a nurse for 37 years. I knew the difference between a device meant to monitor an environment and one meant to monitor a person. In the morning, I didn't follow my usual routine. I didn't sit with tea by the window or water the plants. Instead, I grabbed a small notepad from the junk drawer in the kitchen and started moving room by room, slowly, carefully. I called it dusting in my mind, though I wasn't holding a rag. I was looking. looking for angles, reflections, subtle red lights, things that didn't belong. The living room had two, one nestled inside a decorative orb on the bookshelf, another tucked just beneath the frame of a recessed ceiling light. Both had the same tiny blink. I jotted them down. Living room, bookcase, ceiling. West corner, I kept moving. The hallway held one in the thermostat. The screen was touch-sensitive, but beneath it, a dot so small I had to tilt my head to see it. In the kitchen, the camera was hidden in what I thought was a timer. It sat mounted near the stove, round and brushed silver, almost artistic. It faced the kitchen island directly where I had eaten dinner the night before. I stared at it for a long time, then wrote, kitchen, above fridge. Timer shell. I made my way to the laundry room where I heard the same faint click again. This time I stood still before walking in. The sound repeated just once, then silence. On the shelf above the dryer was a small speaker, or what I assumed was a speaker. I lifted it. Underneath was a slit, barely wider than a coin, a lens. That's when I began to feel it. Not just that I was being watched, but that I had been watched. For days, maybe longer. My skin prickled beneath my sweater. I closed the laundry room door gently, not because I wanted to be discreet, but because suddenly I didn't want the house to know what I was doing. I moved to the far hallway, the one that curved near the formal dining room. Caroline had mentioned the lighting in that wing was smart adjusted, meaning it would adapt to the time of day. As I stepped into it, the lights warmed automatically. But when I reached the built-in cabinet by the wall, I noticed something strange. One of the panels didn't sit flush like the others. I ran my fingers along the side and felt a tiny groove. It wasn't visible, but it was there. I pressed lightly, and with a soft click, the panel opened. Inside was a narrow storage recess, no larger than a shoebox, built between the studs. It wasn't empty. A mesh of wires ran from a small square box mounted into the back. Two blinking green lights. Below that, a chip, not unlike a hard drive, was slotted into place. It was labeled in tiny black letters, Zone 3, MSTR/LDY/guest. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust, letting my breath slow. Then I quietly closed the panel and backed away. Later that afternoon, I sat in the bay window with my notepad, reviewing the list. 8 cameras in total. Likely more I hadn't found yet. I began sketching a simple map of the house and marking each location, each one angled toward where someone might sit, sleep, eat, or speak. Not security, observation, behavioral tracking. I thought back to something Caroline had said once during brunch when Trevor was explaining their latest home tech updates. "Our house listens better than people do," she had joked, sipping her smoothie. Everyone had laughed. I had laughed too, but I remembered feeling something cold under her words, like a layer of meaning she hadn't intended to share, or maybe she had. That evening, I made a simple dinner, roasted vegetables and rice. I placed the notepad in the drawer beside the oven under a stack of dish towels. Then I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen island. Above the fridge, the little silver timer blinked at me. I didn't look away this time. I raised my glass slowly, held it steady in front of me, and whispered into the quiet air, "You see me now, don't you?" The light blinked once, then again. I sat still for a long time, the glass in my hand, my spine straight, my breath even. If they were watching, I wanted them to watch all of me, not just the version they thought I'd remain, the agreeable, invisible mother who never asked too many questions. But I was asking now, quietly, precisely, and they wouldn't see what was coming next. It happened on the 5th morning. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters after breakfast, a habit I couldn't shake no matter how spotless they already looked. I bent to pick up a fallen spoon from under the sink cabinet when I brushed my hand against the panel of switches on the wall. 6 in a row, all unlabeled. I'd been careful not to touch them before, assuming they controlled lighting scenes or speaker volume. But this time, my fingers nudged the second switch from the left, just slightly, and I heard a sound. A soft beep, followed by the faintest click from down the hall. I froze. It had come from the direction of the security room. I stepped out of the kitchen and walked slowly toward it, my footsteps barely audible on the smooth floor. The door that had been locked since I arrived, silent and inaccessible, now displayed a steady green light. The keypad, once blank, now red, unlocked. My hand hovered in the air for a moment. I wasn't sure if I was about to violate something or reveal something that had been violating me all along. But my curiosity was no longer idle. It was hungry. I pressed the handle, and the door swung open without resistance. The room was smaller than I expected. No bigger than a walk-in closet, but colder. Not in temperature, but in feeling. There was no window, no decoration, no warmth. Just a hum. The sound of machines working in silence. Along the back wall stood a desk with 3 monitors, all active. One displayed a grid of live footage from various rooms in the house. The kitchen, the guest room, the hallway outside the bathroom, the garden path. The other 2 screens were split into folder trees and streaming video files. Below the desk was a tower unit glowing with a blue pulse, and above it a shelf of labeled hard drives. I stepped closer. My name was everywhere. MOM_ANALYTICS. Rosemary Routine. Mood Tracker Ellison. Each file dated, indexed, organized. I reached for the mouse. It was warm to the touch. I clicked open a folder labeled Guest Room Week 3. The thumbnails loaded slowly. Each showed still images from the camera I had noticed above my bed. I selected one at random. The footage opened silently. Me, sitting on the edge of the bed, brushing my hair in the early evening light. I watched myself look out the window, adjust a pillow, then stare into space. I didn't remember doing any of it, but there I was, quiet, unaware, vulnerable. I closed the file and opened another. This one was from the kitchen. I was humming while stirring soup, talking to myself softly, something about a recipe my mother once taught me. It was strange seeing myself like that, not because it was me, but because someone had chosen to keep it, archive it, study it. I moved to the next folder. It was labeled Behavioral Notes. Inside was a spreadsheet, columns for date, time, activity, mood assessment. Someone had written entries like 6:12 p.m., exhibits nostalgic behavior, humming lullaby. 8:40 a.m., talks to framed photo, possible memory episode 1:05 p.m., repeats motion twice, rechecking kettle, monitor for pattern. My hands began to tremble, not from fear but from the weight of it. I wasn't a guest in their home. I was a subject, a pattern, a set of inputs waiting for analysis. I sat down in the chair. The monitors hummed around me like an audience holding its breath. I scrolled through the logs until I found a folder titled Clips for Review. Inside were short recordings, each less than a minute. I clicked one. It was me sitting in the sunroom, reading aloud from a poetry book, my voice soft, deliberate. I thought I was alone. Another clip showed me looking at a photo of Michael, my late husband, and whispering, "You'd hate this house." Then, buried among the files, was one titled simply Caroline_review_call. I hesitated, then double-clicked. The video opened on Caroline sitting at her desk. She was on a video call sipping from a tall glass of something pink, laughing with someone I didn't recognize. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she looked comfortable. Too comfortable. "I mean, honestly," she said, leaning toward the screen, "we're studying the decline in cognitive coherence in real time. It's both heartbreaking and fascinating. She still sings those little songs from when I was a kid, and she talks to Dad's photo like it answers." The person on the other end chuckled. "I told Trevor," Caroline continued, "we should start compiling it. Like seriously, it could be a whole case study, emotional degradation in aging caregivers. It's textbook, and she doesn't even know I didn't hear the rest. I clicked pause. I sat there, surrounded by blinking drives and glowing monitors, and felt something inside me fracture. Not loudly, but deeply, like a hairline crack in porcelain, clean, irreversible. I looked around the room again, the cameras, the labels, the charts, the door still open behind me. I stood slowly, walked over to the shelf, and picked up one of the hard drives. It was labeled Ellison_audio-sleep cycle. I didn't want to know what that meant. I set it back down and walked out, gently closing the door behind me. Back in the hallway, the house resumed its silence. But now it wasn't peaceful. It was complicit. The floors, the walls, the lights, they had all watched, all participated, all knew more about me than I had ever shared willingly. Caroline had once said, "We trust you." But trust isn't surveillance. It isn't a spreadsheet. It isn't silence wrapped in science. It was betrayal, dressed up in data. And I had just seen it. Every frame, every file, every moment they thought I was too quiet to notice. But I noticed now. I didn't go back into the security room right away. I spent the rest of that day moving through the house like someone in a museum of their own life. Quiet, cautious, painfully aware that every step left a footprint on a floor someone else was studying. I didn't make tea. I didn't water the plants. I didn't sit in the sunroom with a book. I just floated. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed with the lights off, watching the faint red dot blink in the corner. I'd covered it with a scarf earlier, but the cloth slipped, and I didn't bother to fix it. Let it watch. I wasn't afraid anymore, just hollow. By morning, I knew I had to go back. I needed to understand what they had built, what they had done. It wasn't enough to feel betrayed. I needed to know how far the betrayal reached. The door to the security room remained unlocked, as if it had been waiting for me. This time, I brought my reading glasses and a notebook. The system was more complex than I realized. It wasn't just video footage and audio logs, it was data. Aggregated, color-coded, algorithmically sorted data. There were folders labeled with terms like affective analysis, behavioral drift, cognitive trends, and one that simply said Phase 2. I opened Affective Analysis. Inside was a dashboard, clearly designed by Trevor or someone he worked with. It tracked my emotional states over time, based on facial expressions, tone of voice, physical habits. Each day had a summary. Mood subdued. Mood nostalgic. Mood erratic, cross-referenced. There were pie charts and heat maps. I was a project, not a person. I moved to the folder Cognitive Trends. Here were longer reports, multi-page documents with clinical headings. One read, Speech pattern deceleration over 90 days. Another, Memory loop indicators, subject referencing deceased spouse repeatedly. The language was cold, detached. I wasn't Rosemary Ellison, mother, widow, retired nurse. I was subject RE, and apparently I was showing signs of decline. Then I saw the PDF, recommendation_report_Q4. I opened it, and the first line stole the air from my chest. Subject RE shows consistent markers of early-stage cognitive regression. Recommendation: initiate transition to assisted care evaluation by Q4 to ensure proactive estate and welfare planning. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands went cold. They weren't just watching me. They were planning around me, preparing to move me like a chess piece off the board. My mind raced. Was this why Caroline had been so insistent about me staying here while they traveled? To collect data? To build a case? The door behind me remained open, casting a sliver of hallway light onto the floor. I sat back in the chair and closed my eyes. Not to cry. I didn't feel tears coming yet. I felt something worse. Like I had been hollowed out slowly over weeks and only now realized how empty the house had made me. I opened the folder titled Internal. Inside were communications, emails, message drafts, presentation slides. One draft email caught my attention. 2. Investor@lifetact.ai. The subject line read, Potential Application, Observational Study, Passive Aging Capture. The sender was Trevor. I clicked to open. It wasn't finished, but it was enough. Hi, Max. Attaching preliminary results from our passive monitoring install. Pilot case, RE. Data points are compelling, especially the morning to evening affective curve. We might package it as an emotional surveillance case study. Could support the next round of funding he was selling me. Or trying to. Not just my privacy, but my decline, my memories, my loneliness. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen. The cursor in the email blinked at the end of his unfinished sentence. Like it, too, was waiting to see if I understood yet. I did. I opened the slides he'd attached. There was a title on the first one, The Mother File, Real-Time Insights from Familiar Proximity. The next slide had a heat map of my movement in the house over the course of a day, bright spots in the kitchen, hallway, guest room. The caption read, Patterns of drift when alone versus engaged. Another slide showed timestamps next to emotional tags. Long silence, potential sadness. Soft speech, uncertain. Self-correction in storytelling. And then came a video clip embedded in the presentation. I didn't want to press play, but I did. It was me. Sitting at the dining room table reading an old letter from Michael. I'd found it in my suitcase on the second night and opened it while eating soup. The camera had captured the moment I paused, pressed the paper to my chest, and whispered, I miss you, old man. The caption below the clip read, Memory Anchoring Event. Strong, effective trigger. I reached for my notebook, but my hand froze mid-air. What was I going to write? That I had just discovered my daughter and her husband had been studying me like a lab rat? That they had reduced my memories to metadata? Instead, I closed the presentation and opened one last folder, Jenna. There was only one file, a voice memo, probably recorded on Caroline's phone. Jenna's voice came through softly. Mommy said Grandma forgets things now. She said it's okay, but we're watching to make sure she doesn't get lost. I pressed stop. That was the moment the tears came, not because of what Caroline had said or even what Trevor had built, but because Jenna, my sweet girl, had been taught to think I was disappearing. I wasn't disappearing, I was being erased, but not quietly, not anymore. I had seen the file. I had read the plan. I wasn't going to wait for Q4 or whatever phase they thought they were entering next. I stood up, took a long breath, and looked around that cold, humming room. They had called it the mother file, but they had no idea what a mother remembers or what she can do once she's been broken open. I didn't panic. I didn't storm. I didn't call Caroline or Trevor to scream. I simply opened the drawer where I kept my old flash drives and pulled out a 256 gigabyte USB stick with a little silver rose engraved on its side, a gift from Michael back when I first started digitizing our family albums. He'd called it my digital rose. It felt like a seed then. Now, it felt like a blade. I went back to the control room and sat down with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I plugged the USB in and began transferring everything, the camera footage, the analytics reports, the emails, the presentations, all of it. Each file I dragged felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had sliced away. I created a folder on the USB and named it Ellison Evidence. Not Mom, not subject RE. My name, my life. The transfer took over an hour. I used that time to write. I opened a blank document and titled it, My Statement. I didn't write like a victim. I wrote like a witness. My name is Rosemary Ellison. I am 68 years old. I am of sound mind and body. This file is my statement given freely about what I experienced in the residence of my daughter Caroline and her husband Trevor Ellison during their time away in July. I documented everything: the surveillance, the behavioral tagging, the emotional profiling, the use of my presence as a data gathering prototype. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I let their own files provide the weight. I just narrated the truth. Once it was done, I recorded myself reading it aloud, seated in the very chair where the video of me reading Michael's letter had been captured. I looked directly into the security camera. I wanted my eyes in their files now, too. When the recording finished, I attached the video to a new folder titled "To Caroline and Trevor" and uploaded it into their system. I replaced the idle default screen on their home security dashboard with a timed trigger, so that the video would autoplay the moment they turned the system back on upon their return. And then I crafted one more message. This one wasn't for them. I opened my email and typed a name I hadn't contacted in over 6 years: Elliot Harding. Elliot had been our legal counsel when Michael was still alive. He'd helped us fight off a predatory buyer trying to cheat us out of our agricultural land's mineral rights. He'd known Michael well and had once told me I was too calm for a woman that fierce. I liked him for that. Elliot was sharp, tenacious, and allergic to anything unethical. Subject: need your guidance on an urgent family matter. I kept the email succinct but clear. I explained I had discovered a large-scale invasion of privacy, potentially bordering on elder exploitation and medical fraud. I didn't accuse Caroline or Trevor of crimes. I knew better than to get emotional in writing. I simply attached the evidence and asked him to review the files and call me if he believed it warranted further steps. I ended with, "P.S. I still remember how you outmaneuvered Langston Corp in under 2 weeks. I'm hoping you're still as fast." I hit send. The USB, now full and warm from data transfer, felt heavier in my palm than it had in the drawer. I tucked it into the hidden lining of my handbag, a small zipper pocket meant for valuables. That felt fitting. Outside, the garden was waking up. Sprinklers ticked quietly against the lawn. The wind chimes, a gift from Jenna years ago, sang softly from the pergola. I sat in the kitchen and brewed a pot of tea. Not the fancy, imported jasmine Caroline stocked. Just black tea. Plain, familiar, mine. The house, once filled with humming tech and calculated. Manipulation now felt like it was holding its breath. I wondered if the cameras were still recording. I looked at one in the corner of the ceiling and smiled. Let them see me make tea. Let them record this part too, the part where I became more than their subject. I took a notebook and scribbled a note in blue ink. "Caroline, I was your mother before I was your data set, before I was your prototype, and I am still your mother now. You recorded my pain. I recorded your intentions. We're even. For now." I tore the page, folded it, and slid it into the front cover of the Ellison _ Evidence USB, now back in its case. For the next 2 days, I moved through the house like any guest would. I watered the plants. I read poetry in the sunroom. I watched old movies on mute. But I also changed every password I had ever used. I rerouted my calls through a privacy line. I placed an order for a private mailbox service in town. Quiet actions, intentional. On the 3rd morning, I received a 1-line email reply from Elliot. "Let's meet Monday." This isn't just unethical, it's illegal. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The world was moving as it always did. Sunlight shifting across tile, leaves trembling with breeze. But something fundamental had changed. Not in the house, in me. They had studied my decline, but they missed the one thing I never lost, my sense of self. And now I had the digital rose, not just a symbol of what Michael had given me, but a seed of proof, blooming with justice. They would return to find the same quiet woman they'd left behind. Only this time, the quiet wasn't compliance. It was preparation. The evening they returned, the house welcomed them with quiet so profound it could slice through skin. I had already left. The dishwasher was emptied, the towels folded, my bedroom immaculately made. I even left a half-full bottle of the Merlot they'd offered me on the kitchen counter, opened, untouched. What I didn't leave behind was silence. As they entered the foyer, the security system, now reactivated, whirred softly to life. The hallway light blinked once, then the screen near the thermostat glowed. And there I was, a still image of me, sitting in their sunroom in my pale cardigan, eyes clear, spine straight. Then my voice. "You forgot I was once a nurse," the screen played. "I know how to document pain." I wasn't looking at the camera when I said it. I had my hands folded on my lap, calm, as if speaking to a patient I had just soothed. But my tone, measured, low, cut sharper than any reprimand. They froze, I imagine. Trevor with his smartwatch blinking on his wrist, Caroline still clutching her monogrammed travel bag, watching me speak inside their system. "You studied my habits. You measured my routines. You categorized my coherence. But you never once asked me how I felt." The next clip began without transition. Footage of Caroline from weeks ago, sitting with Trevor in the very same kitchen where they now stood. Her voice floated through the speakers. "I just think we need to act before her decision-making slips too far." "The cognitive baselines are borderline already," Trevor's reply, casual. "If we wait till the end of the quarter, we can document it cleanly, package it ethically." Silence again. Then another recording. Caroline in her office, flipping through a printed spreadsheet labeled mom_sentiment index_V3. "We'll never get this kind of longitudinal data again," she murmured. "It's both heartbreaking and, well, useful." I had left those moments there for them, deliberately. I could have deleted them, but no. Some truths need to echo. I imagined Trevor rushed to the control panel, typing in his override code, only to find the interface locked out. I had changed the access sequence. They would see a single message appear: "System activity backed up externally. Tampering will be noted." No signature. Just that. Upstairs, I left another breadcrumb. In the drawer of my guest room nightstand, beneath the Bible Caroline had once placed there, as a nice touch, I slipped in a sealed envelope. Inside, a printed list of every file I'd exported and the contact information for Elliot Harding, my attorney. On the flap, I wrote in cursive, "In case you forget who raised you." But the final precaution wasn't for them. It was for the world. 2 days before they returned, I scheduled an email to several media outlets, independent investigative reporters, elder rights advocates, and one podcast host who had once interviewed me after Michael's death about rural health care injustice. The email subject line read, "If I disappear, start here." In the body, I explained that I had uncovered a privately run surveillance operation designed to monitor and categorize the emotional and cognitive health of an elderly subject, myself, under the guise of family care. I did not accuse. I presented. I attached copies of sanitized documentation, metadata logs, analysis charts, video transcripts, and I timed it. The emails were scheduled to send 48 hours after Caroline and Trevor's return, unless I canceled them, which of course I had no intention of doing. Back in their house, I suspect they began arguing. Caroline's voice rising, Trevor pacing, both of them pointing at different parts of the system, trying to regain control. But they wouldn't find a reset button. They wouldn't find a way to scrub what they had already done. I had moved first. They had studied me like a data set. But I had learned something from all those years as a nurse, from all those nights sitting by bedsides, from all those mornings poring over charts, catching anomalies no one else saw. People reveal themselves not in noise, but in the spaces between. They had underestimated the power of stillness. They had mistaken silence for absence. And now, Silence was all they could hear. But it was no longer theirs. It was mine. The lavender had started to bloom when I stepped into the garden. It was late afternoon, the light soft and slanting, the way it used to fall across our kitchen floor when Caroline was still little, coloring at the table while I prepared dinner. Back then, silence meant peace. Now, it was war in disguise. I stood near the stone bench beneath the cedar tree, facing the path from the house. They came out together. Caroline in flats and a cream sweater far too clean for someone who claimed to love gardening, Trevor in his crisp polo and a face that didn't know how to look sorry. Caroline spoke first. "Mom, can we please talk inside?" I shook my head. "No, this is where I breathe." She hesitated, then glanced at Trevor, whose jaw was set like a door locked from the inside. They both stepped forward, but I didn't move. "I want to make this clear," I began. "You can either acknowledge what you've done and take meaningful steps to make it right, or I proceed as planned." Caroline's lips parted. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "That's not the same as not hurting me." She stepped forward again, hands clasped as if rehearsing sincerity. "We were worried. You've been forgetting things lately, repeating yourself. You called Jenna by the wrong name last month." I nodded slowly. "So you decided to monitor my every move? Label my habits? Record me singing lullabies and talking to your father's photo?" Trevor finally spoke. "We were trying to build a safety net, a framework to understand cognitive patterns in early aging. You used me," I cut in, my voice even, "not just as a mother." As a subject, he bristled. "We never published anything." "But you planned to." Caroline's face crumpled slightly. "It was for your good." I looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes, once the same shade as mine, looked clouded now, not from age, but calculation. "Then you shouldn't have hidden it." That silenced her. Behind her, Trevor folded his arms. "So what do you want? Money? An apology?" I almost laughed, but the sound died before it reached my throat. "I want you to understand what you took from me," I said. "You took away trust. Safety. My right to live without suspicion in a home I helped you pay for." Caroline flinched. "That's not fair. You had full control of my surroundings, Caroline. The lights, the sensors, the recordings, even my bedtime. And you told yourselves it was love." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "It was love." "No," I said quietly. "Love is asking before installing a camera above your mother's bed. Love is not logging the number of times I boil tea water. Love is knocking on a door, not locking it." Trevor paced a little, clearly uncomfortable. "This could destroy our reputations. Our business. Jenna..." I raised a hand. "This is not about Jenna." His mouth opened again, but I kept going. "I don't want to shame you. I want you to learn. You built a system designed to catch my decline, but you missed my strength. I didn't fade, Trevor. I noticed. I remembered. I acted." Caroline sat down slowly on the bench, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked at the ground, then up at me. "What happens now?" I took a breath. "I've spoken to Elliot. The data is secured and time-stamped. The legal route is open. The press has a file ready to publish." She blinked, stunned. "You scheduled it before you came home," I said, "along with a message to Jenna in case you try to paint me as unstable." Trevor looked visibly rattled. He muttered something under his breath. "But," I added, letting the word hang in the air, "I'm offering you a choice." They both looked at me now. "You issue a public statement acknowledging what happened. You set up a fund, not for me, but for elder rights education and tech transparency, and you apologize. Not in legal language, not behind doors, but face forward." With truth, Caroline looked gutted. "And if we do that," she whispered. "Then I let the rest go," I said. "No court. No headlines, just distance and clarity. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites relationships, no longer the hush before bedtime or the comfort of knowing someone's nearby, but the vast quiet between people who had once shared trust and now stood in its ruins. I waited. Caroline nodded, barely. Trevor didn't speak, and I turned and walked back into the house, past the rosemary bush I'd planted the week before, with no intention of staying long enough to watch it bloom. The morning Elliot arrived, the air was still. Not the peaceful still of early summer, but the kind that waits for something to be signed, something to be severed. He wore the same gray blazer he had on the day he helped me reclaim our family's farmland lease from a corporate shell pretending to be a neighbor. That was years ago. He looked older now, so did I, but the resolve in his voice hadn't aged. We sat in the sunroom. I chose that space on purpose. Every corner of the house had eyes, but I'd had this one quietly scanned. It was the only room I trusted not to listen. He laid out the documents between us like cards at a table where the stakes weren't money, but memory. "This is a conditional silence agreement," Elliot said calmly. "You have the power to go public, Rosemary. But if you want closure without spectacle, this achieves that with safeguards." I read through it line by line. My name typed cleanly at the top. Their names, Caroline Ellison Murphy and Trevor Murphy, accompanied by their respective counsel. Clause 1. Full reimbursement of investment, including the funds I contributed to the down payment on this house, the monthly amounts quietly withdrawn from my name, and the landscaping upgrades I paid for when Jenna was born. They had tried to bury those expenses under gift categories. Elliot dug them back out. Clause 2, a formal letter of apology signed by both, not generic, not ghostwritten, acknowledging not just emotional harm but specific actions, surveillance without consent, exploitation of personal data, and the erosion of trust through manipulation. Clause 3, data deletion guarantee. All digital content gathered without my consent, footage, audio, pattern reports, AI summaries, daily routine logs, emotional heat maps, was to be permanently erased under third-party verification. Clause 4. A private housing allowance separate from any inheritance or shared assets, enough to secure a quiet, dignified residence of my choosing, with no strings, no expectations, and no monitoring. I looked at Elliot. "And if they break any of this?" He met my eyes. "Then we go nuclear." It wasn't his style to dramatize, which made the words land harder. I nodded, not because I wanted vengeance, but because I needed them to understand I had options. Always had. That afternoon, we gathered in the living room, not in any symbolic circle, no tea, no warmth, just signatures and the long shadow of what they'd done. Trevor arrived first, expression unreadable behind designer frames. He didn't shake Elliot's hand. Caroline followed minutes later, eyes red but face composed, like she was auditioning for redemption. She sat without speaking. Elliot placed the papers on the coffee table. "These are the final terms," he said, "reviewed and mutually confirmed." Trevor skimmed through the pages quickly, as though speed could soften them. Caroline read slower. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. Trevor signed first. His pen moved with the precision of a man who calculates ROI even in apologies. Caroline paused before signing. She glanced at me. "I thought I was protecting you." I kept my voice low. "You were protecting a version of me you didn't bother to ask about." She nodded, signed, and with that, the deal was done. Elliot collected the documents. "A digital copy will be emailed. Hard copies will be stored securely for enforcement." Trevor rose. "So, we just pretend none of it happened?" "No," I said. "You live knowing it did." "And I live knowing I stopped it." They left without another word. The door clicked shut behind them like a period on a chapter I hadn't wanted to write. Elliot stayed behind a few minutes longer. "You did this with grace," he said, Most people would have gone straight for blood. I did once, I replied quietly, and it bled me more than them. He nodded, understanding. Where will you go? Somewhere that doesn't blink when I move, I said. Somewhere I can forget how it feels to be observed instead of seen. He didn't ask for more. We parted with a hug, the kind people share when they know they may not meet again, but respect has already etched permanence into the silence between them. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd first read the note from Caroline. You'll love the peace here. It sat folded now beside my teacup, as if waiting to be answered. I didn't reply. Instead, I packed, slowly, deliberately. No need for haste when you're no longer escaping, but choosing. I left the herbs I'd planted by the windowsill. Someone else might water them, or not. Either way, I'd rooted enough of myself here. And when I walked out the front door the next morning, suitcase in one hand, USB in the other, I didn't look back. They'd taken enough from my past. My future, however, was leaving with me. The road leading to the edge of town was lined with whispering pine trees and fields left to grow wild. It felt like driving into a different kind of silence, one that wasn't forced on me, but chosen. At the very end of that road, nestled just before the tree line, stood the little blue house. It wasn't grand. It didn't have security systems or motion-detecting lights or smart thermostats that adjusted based on behavioral patterns. It just stood there, blue, still, waiting. I first saw it decades ago in a postcard shop when I was a nursing student. A picture of a little blue cottage by the woods with a white fence and ivy curling up the sides. I kept that postcard in my wallet for years, long after I'd traded my dreams of solitude for marriage, motherhood, and then grandmotherhood. I never thought I'd live in it. But somehow, life folded back on itself and led me here. The landlady's name was Margot. She greeted me with a pie she'd baked herself and hands that showed signs of work. Gardening, maybe, or just a life fully lived. Her hair was white and wild, tied back with a scarf. She smiled the moment I stepped out of the car. I thought you might be the quiet type, she said. I smiled back. Is that a problem? Lord, no. I prefer quiet types. They listen better. She showed me around the cottage, a single bedroom, kitchen with a creaky stove, a screened porch that overlooked a slope of wild daisies. No surveillance, no hidden microphones, just the sounds of wind, distant birds, and the soft creak of floorboards. The first night, I left the windows open and slept without a nightlight, not because I was brave, but because for the first time in years, I didn't need one. I wasn't being watched. I wasn't a subject. I wasn't data. In the mornings, I took to walking barefoot through the garden patch. The soil was soft, forgiving. Margot would already be outside by the time I joined her, in boots that looked older than both of us combined. She offered me a second pair, smaller, scuffed, but sturdy. I don't usually rent to anyone, she told me one day, tossing seeds into a furrow with graceful precision. But you reminded me of someone. Who? I asked. Myself, 30 years ago. After my daughter stopped calling, stopped visiting, said I was too much, too emotional, too unpredictable. She used to say I didn't align with her lifestyle. I didn't say anything. I just dug beside her. She didn't need sympathy. She needed company. So we planted things, not just vegetables, dreams, boundaries, little patches of who we were before the world decided we were only burdens. In the evenings, we sat on the porch, sometimes with tea, sometimes with silence. Margot crocheted blankets she never sold, just stacked them in a chest for someday guests I wrote in an old leather journal I found buried in a box from my youth. Pages filled slowly. Thoughts, memories, lines of poetry I no longer worried were too sentimental. One afternoon I received a letter, handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the slant in the cursive. Caroline. It was short. No apologies this time. Just a line. I hope you found peace. Jenna misses you, I read it once, then again. I didn't cry. I didn't feel hatred. Just distance. Like remembering a version of yourself you no longer inhabit. I folded the letter and placed it in a book on the shelf. Not to forget. Just to stop holding it so tightly. Margot noticed the shift in me the next morning. You look lighter, she said. Maybe I am, I replied. Maybe letting go isn't defeat. Maybe it's a quiet kind of victory. She nodded like she already knew. As summer deepened, the garden thrived. Tomatoes hung like lanterns. Lavender spilled over the edges of the stone path. The air was thick with bees and the hum of things finding their place. I found myself laughing more, not big, loud laughter, but that soft, contented kind that bubbles up when your hands are in the earth and nothing aches quite as much as it used to. Margot taught me how to pickle cucumbers. I taught her how to make scones from an old Scottish recipe my mother once knew. We were not trying to start over. We were simply living in the version of now we'd been denied for too long. We started calling our patch of earth the Quiet Acre. It was our private joke. Two women discarded by their families, growing things in silence, building a kind of sisterhood that didn't need permission. Some evenings, I'd look out from the porch and think about everything that had happened. The cameras, the files, the analysis of my routines, my emotions, my humanity. I thought about how easily people can reduce others to numbers, how they wrap control in the language of care. But I also thought about what survived. Dignity, autonomy, my voice, my name. I wasn't anyone's study anymore. I was Rosemary Ellison, former nurse, mother, widow, gardener, friend. Not a subject, not a burden, just a woman who had learned, finally, to live without being measured. And when the wind moved through the trees and the blue house glowed in the late afternoon light, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The morning light filtered through the linen curtains like it had nowhere else to be. It moved slowly across the floorboards, pausing on the little writing desk Margot had insisted I take from her attic. She said every woman needed a space for her thoughts. I hadn't argued. It was quiet in the cottage, the kind of quiet that doesn't beg to be filled, but simply allows you to rest inside it. The kettle hissed softly in the kitchen. Margot was out back tending to the rosemary bush, saying something about how plants needed to be spoken to gently if they were going to grow with grace. I believed her. I sat at the desk and reached for the drawer. Inside, tucked beneath a folded cloth napkin, was the USB drive. The plastic was worn at the edges from where I'd gripped it too tightly during those first weeks. It was strange how such a small object could hold so much. Fear, betrayal, anger, grief, calculation, humiliation, but also, strangely, a kind of awakening. I plugged it into the laptop. No passwords anymore, no facial recognition, just a single folder labeled Mother. I hesitated for a moment before clicking. Inside were subfolders, daily routines, emotional states, verbal decline samples, risk patterns, night activity logs. It read like a study or an autopsy, not of my body, but of my life. I opened a few. My voice caught on hidden microphones, narrating the most ordinary parts of my day. I think I'll wear the blue sweater today. Did I already feed the cat? No, I didn't. Oh, Harold, I miss your hands on Sunday mornings. That last one stopped me. I remembered that morning. I had touched the frame of his photo on the mantel and whispered into the stillness. I hadn't known I was being watched. Or maybe I had. Maybe some part of me always knew. There was a video clip too. A shaky infrared recording of me singing softly to myself in the kitchen. I looked peaceful and painfully alone. I clicked through the documents, one marked Behavioral Recommendations. It had Caroline's initials at the bottom and a date, months before they moved me in. Subject displays signs of fragmented memory recall and ritual repetition. Recommend soft transitional strategy to memory care consultation in the fourth quarter. Monitor emotional volatility closely. Continued data capture required. I exhaled slowly. Subject: not mother, not Rosemary, not even she. Just subject. I highlighted the folder. My finger hovered over the delete key, but not yet. Instead, I created a new document on the desktop. Blank. Waiting. I stared at the cursor blinking. Then I typed, "You are not research, you are remembered." I let that sentence sit there. Not for them. For me. I returned to the folder, selected all contents, held down Shift, pressed Delete. The screen asked, "Are you sure you want to permanently delete these 542 items?" I clicked, "Yes." The files vanished in less than a second, just a blip of space reclaimed on a machine that no longer held power over me. I leaned back and looked out the window. Margot had her hands in the dirt, planting something purple and wild. She glanced up and waved. I waved back. It felt like the end of something, and the beginning of something far less complicated. I closed the laptop, slid the USB back into the drawer, and reached for my journal. The leather cover was soft from use. I had filled maybe a dozen pages so far, mostly with memories I didn't want to forget, stories of patients I had once nursed, recipes I still remembered by heart, and moments of stillness that didn't ask anything of me. I turned to a fresh page. Below the sentence I'd typed earlier, I wrote it again by hand. "You are not research. You are remembered." Then, in smaller letters beneath it, "and you are still becoming." There would be no final analysis, no conclusive report, no chart mapping my decline or predicting my end. There would only be mornings like this, tea steeping on the windowsill, dirt under fingernails, lavender drying in the hallway, the quiet laughter of two women who had chosen peace over permission. Outside, a breeze carried the scent of mint and soil into the room. I let it in, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like data. I felt like myself.